Race. When you hear this word, what does it make you think of? Biology, a social construct, your own race, the word racism. All of these things tied together into clinical care and research that affects a single person and their identity. Pre-existing scientific studies have been shown to reflect the deterministic nature of research regarding structural inequities and their perceived impact on the brain. My name is Clara Bloom.
My name is Melina Nguyen.
My name is Nayla Jimenez.
My name is Pooja Sampelli.
My name is Arya Zoe.
I'm Tita Azadi.
And I'm Kate Hills.
Our essential question is, what are the ethical implications of investing the neurobiological consequences of structural inequities in research and clinical care?
So for the historical context, we chose two specific examples that exemplified how the medical and scientific field has been weaponized against minority groups and how they have reinforced stereotypes about them. The first example we chose was the Holocaust, where Nazis and neo-Nazis used science to justify their anti-Semitism by claiming that being Jewish was a race rather than a religion and that they were an inherently inferior race. The second example we chose was drapetomania, that in 1851, Samuel Cartwright proposed that Black slaves who wanted to run away from bondage had a mental illness for having this desire. This drapetomania remained diagnosable until 1978, which shows that relatively modern healthcare still interprets Blackness as a pathological condition due to the lack of adequate studies.
So to understand how history has led to this sort of modern drapetomania, it's important to understand certain definitions. So as you can see from the diagram on the left that we as a group created, structural inequities and their constituents are all part of one big circle. Each of these groups of people have possibly experienced different discrimination towards them, giving them different disparities in life. One thing we wanted to focus on in our presentation was race. But when we hear the word race, there's actually two definitions of the same word. Race in a biology sense, scientifically, means your ancestry, your DNA, where you come from. And there are studies that show that this race connects to neurobiological diseases if you migrated from a certain place, passed down through ancestors, things like that. But race in a social context, the construct that we created, meaning your experience, how you go through life, how you identify, also has a huge part to do in your neurobiology. If you're discriminated against, could it have an effect on your brain? It is important when investigating the neuro effects of structural inequities to realize the risk of perpetuating stigmatization and discrimination back onto those groups when we talk about them as a whole. This brings up extensive ethical questions that we need to propose solutions to.
Our first key issue is the ambiguity of definitions in studies and its applications to clinical care. On the right side of our slide, you can see that our team has illustrated this process in order to help us better understand this cycle. So first in this cycle, we have to address its origins and where it lies. And this can be found in the ambiguous definitions in studies published by researchers and studies. And this can be misinterpreted by doctors. And as a result of this, inaccurate diagnoses may be projected upon patients, and patients may be administered incorrect treatments. This will have an direct negative effect upon the patients, and as a result, more studies may be conducted to see the correlation between these two. Between these two and more studies can come more ambiguous definitions within these studies, and this only continues the cycle and reinforces the pattern that we are seeing as of right now. But we must intervene and stop this cycle.
Our second key issue is how inadequate studies cause distrust and contribute to the cycle. As we established, inadequate studies are mainly due to the use of ambiguous terminology in studies published by researchers and scientists, which overall contain a lack of precision. Now, the terms and precision of published studies is crucial in order to avoid generalizing and contributing to stigmas, as we previously discussed, surrounding certain groups and overall accuracy, because mind you, the research published by scientists is what is studied by clinical care workers. So if anything about that research is overgeneralized, too vague, that can cause an issue in treatment, which we call mistreatment. So in mistreatment, this can range from false diagnoses to diagnoses that aren't being made that need to be made. So whatever it is, some patients will be unable to receive proper treatment. The linear structure of this cause and effect after cause and effect contributes to the perpetual cycle that starts in the science, leads to the clinical care, and ultimately, as a result, causes the unfortunate lack of trust from a patient to their very own medical health professionals.
So in order to visually represent the cycle that we've been discussing, our team created this diagram that essentially represents the real world today and how we see it. So in the beginning, historically disadvantaged communities have continuously suffered from structural inequities, whether that be because of race, gender, or other social constructs that we've created. Over time, these have manifested into tangible limitations that affect the populations of marginalized communities inherently as a result of these structural inequities. Examples of this could be lack of access to healthcare, the stigmatization of mental health in these communities, and disparities in socioeconomic status. Now, this is the formative and driving force in creating the social experiences of the populations. We already established previously that there's a historical lack of trust between the clinician and the patient, and that continues to persist today, even in the modern world. This lack of trust actively inhibits the ability for scientists to develop and further study structural inequity and marginalized communities. Now, on the other hand, we have the social experiences and also the ethnographic genetic predispositions or the genetic ancestry of these communities. This can be perceived as biological race, but race is not a biological construct. The combination of these two creates tendencies to possess certain neurological conditions, which is why that there's tendencies to possess certain neurological conditions. So essentially what we have is a supply and demand relationship. Because there are tendencies to possess these neurological conditions, that creates a demand for point of care and specialized treatment in order to even the playing field, in a sense, of health across the world. However, since we have limited structural inequity related studies, we're not able to supply that demand because those studies directly correlate to how doctors administer treatment, medication, and so forth. Therefore, the cycle keeps continuing and will continue to persist unless we actively intervene.
All right, so one of our key issues that we are explaining as a group is the ambiguity of definitions in studies and its applications to clinical care. Our proposal to address this issue is by proposing a new type of lexicon, which will be used in replacement for the double definition term of race. The benefits of this new proposal is that researchers will have a new term to use in their written work that goes out to not only public, but other researchers, which can lessen the miscommunication between that the public can have. The other benefit of this proposal is that mental health professionals that come into contact with patients with neurological conditions can pinpoint the issues that these patients will have because they will be able to use the two different terms of our new lexicon, Mental health professionals will now be able to use this lexicon to determine the two different kinds of causes for these neurological conditions, whether the condition is stemming from the genetically passed down issues or whether it is coming from a negative interaction with a social construct. This lexicon is extremely important, for without it, there will be a continued miscommunication between the public and the research that is being conducted.
In order to address our second key issue, we're promoting the advocacy of sensitivity training in medicine, specifically in the psychosocial mental health and therapy spaces. Now, we want to specify these spaces because the doctor's ability to assess and understand, empathize, and adequately treat these patients is directly correlated to how they administer their quality of care. If the doctors are able to fully comprehend the patient's experience, which is formed by structural inequities, then they'll be able to deliver a higher quality of care, therefore maximizing good outcomes across the world.
Now, when proposing a big change, such as changing lexicon, there are bound to be critics who aren't fully convinced yet. They will say that changing lexicon is actually a huge undertaking that will take a lot of time to do. However, historically, this can be disproven. There are many terms that we still use there are many terms that we still use that have been changed from their old terminology, such as LGBTQ, such as LGBTQ, neurodiversity, and the Romas, who were once referred to as the gypsies. But the biggest factor in determining whether lexicon will actually be changed or not is the active push to do so. If there is a movement that sees this change through, if the shoe drops hard enough, old terminology can be rendered obsolete and ineffective, and new terminology and new lexicon will be considered the new norm and be standardized.
Our first limitation for our second key issue is the feasibility of advocating for sensitivity training in the psychosocial mental health and therapy spaces. Another limitation that may be brought to light is if doctors are going to be able to internalize what they're learning through these sensitivity training and being able to use this information when diagnosing their patients, as well as treating them and being able to empathize with them on a deeper level so that they meet the needs of their patients. But we cannot solve this yet. Our project is mainly focused on being able to start the dialogue and get the word out there so that the public is more informed about this issue. And as a result of that, this is the dissolvement of the cycle. And further on in the future, we're going to be able to stop furthering structural inequities, prioritize the patient's care, and lastly, stop the distrust between the patients and the providers.
We hope that this paper will help people view individuals as a connection of all their experiences that will influence the care they need to get.
As a team that comes from multiple different backgrounds and of races ourselves, this prevailing issue is increasingly important to us. So we hope that there's a big urge to change for you guys as much as there is for us. Here are citations. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Oh, very nicely done and very, very well presented. This is an important topic, and it's you took on an ambitious topic or approach, and I applaud you for that. And I think this is one of the things I wanted to say that stood out to me was highlighting this relationship between research and the downstream effects of how it's utilized in the clinical space. Right? That's really, really it's a key insight that you guys had, and it's thought-provoking for me. So I really appreciate that, and I think that's very important.
Thanks. I really appreciate that you pointed out that there's a potential for structural inequities to be used as a proxy for race and applied as a construct in the same way that race does by projecting a group effect onto potentially individuals and looking at the effect of that. So I thought that was a really kind of sophisticated way to approach it and think about it. And I appreciated as well your attention to things like words and also the limitations of sensitivity training and things like that, and actually doing, because there's a lot of times where you can educate people, but that doesn't actually necessarily impact behavior just because people are informed. So looking at these systemic effects and thinking about it as a system like that is really important. So good job.
Agreed. And the slides made sense. You were able to explain the cycle and what was wrong with it and why, which led very smoothly into your suggestions about what can be done about it because it all correlated, right? This, boom, boom, boom. So there was a logical structure to it that very much needed in any sort of ethical discussion.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of sort of architectures and articulations, right? And so what I really liked is that what you ladies did beautifully was to create these types of graphic tables that show a flow chart, because those represent the possible points of not only the architectural issues, but where the sort of articulation of change could occur. So that's brilliant. I mean, by themselves, those diagrams speak volumes. And I really commend you on the clarity of that, of not only the visual, but the way you walked your audience through that in a very concise way, but with great clarity and in a way that then allowed for a comprehensive conclusion. So incredibly well done on those regards, and overall, just bravo to all of you. Good work.